Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for joining us. Well, we're going to talk about the missed opportunities in the state legislature, but first, two reporters talk about the big stories of the week. You don't want to miss this. Back after these words.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
All right, we're going to take up some important subjects, and joining me to do that, as often is the case, is Marc Levy with the Associated Press and Angela Couloumbis with Spotlight Pennsylvania, two reporters that have been covering state politics and the state legislature. And I'm going to throw in the governor's office and other statewide offices for a long time. All right, I'm going to start with you, Marc Levy. Missing records. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about the kind that used to spin around, you know, no. that play music, but go ahead. What records are missing?
These are far more important records, and primarily it is records tracking evidence submissions of the Pennsylvania State Police were apparently wiped out during routine computer server maintenance by a state employee.
What kind of records, state police records, are these?
Tracking evidence. So when they log evidence into their custody, what they do with it, what happens when they test it at the lab or run it through the lab. These are records as part of criminal cases. Now, the state police says, you know, there was no threat to the actual underlying, pieces of evidence that are in custody. But nonetheless, they have informed their partner law enforcement agencies of this, and
this could affect cases? Is that the whole point?
Well, there was a letter that went out at the start of the week by state police to the various police departments and other law enforcement agencies that use the state police's labs. The state police has 6 forensic labs and a DNA lab. And in that letter, the state police said that evidence that was handled in its labs between mid-June of last year and the start of this year is basically not recoverable. Now, the question is, can they manually re-enter information to reconstruct it? I think that remains a question mark at the moment.
And we'd have to see, I guess, how that all works out in court then, right?
Right. It could be some time, but we'll see if the defense attorneys decide that they want to challenge the evidence in court.
Well, and what do you think defense lawyers are going to do?
Yeah, I mean, if they think there's an opportunity there to win their case that way, you have to assume that they will.
All right, we have something reasonably new in Harrisburg, and I'll use the word cuss words. You don't have to say what they are. You can abbreviate them. But who's using cuss words, and why is that different?
Well, Marc Levy here wrote a story this past week about Governor Shapiro and how he is using a 4-letter word that starts with S as part of his slogan. The G-rated way of saying it is "get stuff done." It is an interesting use for a personality like Governor Shapiro. In some ways, it seems a little incongruous to his personality. He's very buttoned down. He's very controlled in his messaging. He's always been a very good and above-board speaker, but this somehow seems to be appealing to him and his campaign and his administration because he's using it a lot in social media and speeches.
Yeah, were you surprised?
Yeah, I mean, and I think the people I've talked to, the insiders who hear it the most, are sort of surprised every time he uses it. His administration points out that he mostly uses the word stuff, but there are a number of instances where he's used the R-rated word, and here's a guy who is perhaps branding himself and positioning himself and creating an image ahead of what could be a run for the White House in 2028. He is one of a handful of people perceived to be rising stars in the Democratic Party nationally.
Yeah, and and in the surveys that are done, he's popular with the voters. He's got a complex mixed-use agenda, I'll put it that way.
Yes, and I think there's still a question mark as to how voters perceive the use of sort of mild cuss words in like actual slogans, that we'll have to just wait and see how it works with voters.
All right, well, let's run to a break. When we come back, let's talk about the primary, and are there scams out there, and what's all going on with the Pennsylvania primary. And by the way, you can write this down. April 2-3 is when we all get to vote. Back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back. Well, it's primary season in the state of Pennsylvania. April 23rd is primary day. Joining me is Marc Levy and Angela Couloumbis, two reporters who are regular guests on the program. All right, Angela, April 23rd, it's fast approaching. Let's talk a little bit about Pennsylvania has a closed primary.
Right. So in the primaries, if you're affiliated with a major party, you can vote on primary day. Independents do not get to vote unless there is a ballot question, and then they only get to vote on the ballot question, but that's not the case this year. So primary season, as you said, has officially launched. Candidates for various offices are circulating petitions now to gather signatures to appear on the ballot. That is a 3-week period, which will close.
And there's always a debate about that, right? People will go and contest the
signature. Yes. Sometimes, if it's a very close race, you will see that happening. So we'll see whether that plays out. And but what we likely won't see is a contested presidential primary on the Republican side. It appears that former President Donald Trump is fast moving towards securing the Republicans' nomination.
You're talking about Iowa and New Hampshire in particular, right?
Well, right. Nikki Haley has lost there, so the question is how much longer is she going to stay in that race?
That's a good point. All right, what are some of the offices that folks will have a chance to decide who the nominees are for the various offices in their own party?
Right. So all the big offices really are on the ballot this year: President, Senate, Attorney General, Auditor General, Treasurer. The biggest contested races will probably be for Attorney General. There's 5 Democrats who say they want to run. We'll have to see if they can get the signatures to get on the ballot. On the Republican side, we're expecting 2 candidates. For president, we just discussed that. For U.S. Senate, we're really only expecting 1 major candidate from both parties, the incumbent Democrat Bob Casey and the likely nominee Dave McCormick on the Republican side.
Yeah.
So, the biggest, most
McCormick, who lost to Dr. Oz 2 years ago, he is running literally without an opponent as far as I can determine. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. And in addition to that, he has the support of the Republican organization.
That's right. The party has endorsed him. He has the support of major Republican super PACs that pour money into races to help U.S. Senate candidates. Yeah. Now, there is one woman who has said that she plans to challenge him, but she's got to get the signatures to get on the ballot. Either way, she's politically unknown. Dave McCormick has millions of dollars in campaign ads behind him. Even though it was in 2022, he's pretty well known at this point to the Republican base and to the Republican.
And a very wealthy individual, former hedge fund manager. Go ahead.
Right. Long resume, Bush administration official, right. Hedge fund CEO, and he's moved here from Connecticut. He still spends a lot of time in Connecticut, but he is here running. He's basically been running for this office for.
And that's going to be a nationally watched Senate race, correct?
Right. McCormick himself is out there saying that it'll be the most expensive race in the U.S. Senate this year. Pennsylvania is a relatively expensive market in which to run statewide, and of the major contested races for U.S. Senate this year, Pennsylvania is probably the biggest state, and it could be the most expensive one, and it should help. It should be one of the handful of races that determine control of the U.S. Senate.
All right, I tell you, a lot of attention on the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, which is we speak here, is tied.
That's right.
Tied. The Democrats had a 1-seat edge, so that's going to get a huge amount of attention. Which party will control the Pennsylvania House of Representatives?
Well, there's a special election coming up next month to fill a vacancy in the House, which is why it is tied. A lot of attention and money will be poured into that race by both Democrats and Republicans. I mean, I can't stress how significant it would be if Republicans regained control of the House.
Right.
That would put Governor Shapiro in a very, tough spot. Again, like former Governor Wolf, being a Democratic governor dealing with a fully controlled Republican legislature. So as it stands right now, that's the big one coming up. And then obviously in 2024, you have all House seats up, all 203 seats, and then half of those in the Senate.
Half of the Senate. All right, look, I want to thank you for coming on the program. This is a very important update. All right, coming up, missed opportunities in the state legislature. Jeff Coleman joins me, and we'll chat about that and more after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, let's talk about what my next guest refers to as missed opportunities. I'm chatting about bills, policies, procedures, processes in the state legislature that neither Democrats nor Republicans have been able to do very much with. Put another way, get them passed out of the state legislature. Joining me to talk about that and more is Jeff Coleman. He's the principal and founder of Churchhill Strategies. Jeff, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, good to be here. Yeah.
All right, you refer to them as missed opportunities. I like that. So let's start with the Democrats first. These would be obviously policies and programs that Democrats would be expected, likely to support.
Look, I think if you're in a divided government, you have to look for ways to make things work. I mean, the biggest celebrated moment of the last year was Governor Shapiro getting a road reopened. That's when everyone's, well, government can work again. But then you look over at the legislature, and you've got a Republican Senate, you've got a Democratic House, and you've got this narrow margin. So you'd think.
And now it's tied.
That's right.
Because
with that kind of a division, this is a perfect opportunity for a gang of 8, 10, 15 to say, hey, what could we actually get done and work with the people who are currently in leadership? Instead, what you seem to have both in Washington and Harrisburg is everyone's going for the base, straight for the base, saying we're going into re-election year, so let's play the greatest hits. For Democrats, it's abortion, ending programs like Project Win, which is kind of one of these moderate programs which helps pregnant women not choose to have an abortion. From the Casey era, you've got issues like gun control. You've got a very divided committee structure, and gun control isn't going anywhere. So why run the bills?
And more Democrats favor gun control than Republicans.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Now, doesn't mean you shouldn't address these issues, but when you're this close, you try to find areas to build consensus. School choice. Governor Shapiro runs on a limited, moderate view of some kids should be able to get out of a violent or underperforming or a failing school. Instead, it's a complete shutout of school choice and saying, look, we need to just get more money. The public is saying, look, we've had this huge learning loss after COVID. We know that schools aren't working for everyone. This is probably a good time to find some compromise in the middle and not just play for your base.
Yeah. And the fact of the matter is that the divided legislature, 100 Ds, 100 Rs now, it leads to a situation where it's more difficult to get consensus. Am I right or wrong about that?
It's very difficult.
By the way, the gentleman sitting across from me is a former State House member. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I don't want to get nostalgic about it, but you know, in your time in the House, when you look at even 10, 15 years ago, looking at the legislature then, you could not operate on this very thin majority or a tie and be heavy-handed. You had to have some flexibilities on assignments, on bills that you run. But what's happening is Republicans get the gavel, they go heavy-handed. Democrats get the gavel, heavy-handed. No negotiation, no communication. So what will happen? As soon as the Republicans gain control, it's going to be hellfire back to over the Democrats. So the public has a right to say, not just, are you with me on my core issues, but can you get anything done at all? And that's what they're saying about in Harrisburg and Washington.
All right, well, the Democrats have missed opportunities, and so do Republicans, and we'll take that up after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
All right, joining me is Jeff Coleman. He's the principal and founder of Churchhill Strategies and a former member of the State House of Representatives. All right, I think it's time now to talk about Republicans and their missed or failed opportunities.
Yeah, there's a real risk. I mean, you can look at the Democrats and say big missed opportunities, but when you look at Republicans, there are so many areas that Republicans have been silent on for about a decade. Take criminal justice reform. I mean, this is one of the areas where it's easy to go to law and order. But then you've got a situation where you've got a local prison here in Harrisburg paying out $5 million because of maltreatment of prisoners. And you say, wait a second. Pennsylvania has a big history in corrections reform going back to the Quakers of saying, we shouldn't just be warehousing prisoners and creating a monster factory. We should actually be finding ways to rehabilitate so that they go back into society and not turn right back around and come in 6 months. That's all we're doing. What you have is high pressure from people like district attorneys and others saying, crime is rampant in Philly. Let's not deal with the root cause. Let's just continue to build and fund prisons. There's a demand, I think, Republicans could step in, like we did in the Corbett administration, and come up with some solutions. John Wetzel, we've got big voices out there in the Republican Party who should be talking. I was talking to former Councilman David O. yesterday about Kensington. And I go, Republicans love to point out in an election year that Kensington is this open-air drug market in Philadelphia, the lawlessness, the disorder. But when it comes after the election year, we're not at the table offering any solutions. I go, if you want to show some leadership in a moment when there's a divided government, go walk the streets in Kensington.
Does that make it more difficult, the fact that the House is even Democrats and Republicans, does that make it more difficult to get an agenda through?
Two ways to look at it. You can say a divided government means nothing moves, or you can say this is an opportunity for creative actors to step out and do something different.
Does the word compromise come into mind?
Compromise, but in a risk-taking, courageous way. Meaning, if you're a lawmaker, you're rank and file, you're in the back bench, now's the time to make your play. Make a move for one of these big issues. EMS, anywhere you go in Pennsylvania, volunteer fire companies, EMS, all saying the same things. No more volunteers. Our fire companies are collapsing. We're not dealing with response times now if you're having a baby.
And we're in an election year for every member of the House and half the Senate, right?
That's it. So why not get creative as a caucus and have Republicans step up and say, we'll fix it. We've got some ideas. I don't think if you have creative solutions that are not just from the pollster, what they're telling you people fear, but actually finding solutions to problems that people say, I can't live like this anymore. We can't have this in our streets and communities.
Sure. I want to turn to a completely different subject. U.S. Senator John Fetterman, he's a Democrat. He's had a couple of strokes. He used to be known for wearing a hoodie and baggy shorts. Now, every time I see him, he has a coat and tie on. A liberal Democrat, but on several issues, particularly in Israel, the situation with Israel and Hamas, and then we have immigration, he's taken a more conservative position.
Well, I almost think that Fetterman is exactly what we've been talking about. He's found a way in a moment when there is a divided government in Washington and Harrisburg to say, I'm going to protect my core values. Here's some things I don't compromise on. But hey, John Cornyn, or hey, Joe Manchin, or hey, you pick the partner, moderate, conservative, Republican. If we can fix this border thing, or if we can have some clarity on Israel, or we can do some things to fix our infrastructure, I'm going to be there. And I go, that's pretty much the old John Fetterman.
But he's opposed to the open borders. Let's talk about that for a moment.
Yeah. I don't think many people believe sometimes that Republicans are sincere when we talk about immigration. Fetterman seems to have found a way to convince people, number one, he's sincere about it, and then he can actually make the connection to why open borders matter to a city like Pittsburgh, for example, or does it matter to Philadelphia? People say, well, it's so far away, and I kind of agree. But when you say, look, this has implications for cities like ours or states like ours, he does it in a way that doesn't feel as cynical. And I didn't vote for him. And I probably won't vote for him based on his policy positions. But I say, if you want an example of a statesman by new definition, doesn't look like the old statesman of 1930s and 40s and 50s and 60s, looks like this generation in a hoodie. I'll take it. We thought of him anyway as a liberal. I think you would agree with that. And now we have also the situation with Israel and his positions. Yeah, you've got him taking Israel, I think probably personally. He's got a lot of friends in the Jewish community. He understands what's happening. But you should be able to look at a situation, Hamas, invasion, Israel, kidnapping, death, all of this destruction, the horrors of October 7th. You should be able to say, hey, that's bad. What's happening is Democrats and Republicans get up to these issues and they say, aren't you looking at the same thing? And they're saying, we can't say anything, our hands are tied. All people want is for the politician to say what's in their heart and offer some solution that sounds real. He's meeting the authenticity test, and in this moment, people want real, not phony.
And of course, he had these strokes, and I noticed that when he speaks, he doesn't seem to have a difficulty speaking the way he did before.
He's helping a lot of people connect, especially in the disability community, to say if you have a disability. And now people are kind of cheering for him. Instead of making fun of him, they're saying, hey, you did it. You got through it. You're improving. And people love a comeback story.
Thank you. Thanks for coming on the program. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.